All right. Here's the thing: is that I'm a Reformed Baptist like you, proud to be, but I also love my Presbyterian brothers, because oftentimes, I agree with the Presbyterians on more things than often I do the most Baptists. I think you would
Yeah.
experience that to some level as well.
Yeah.
But I can call them brothers because even though they baptize their children, they do not believe in baptismal regeneration.
Most of them. Most
well,
of them. I'm a little concerned about some of the federal visionists, but that's another issue.
Yeah. Doug Wilson. Yeah, that whole deal.
Well, and Doug's the least radical of that group. So that's I'm not even thinking about Wilson at that point. I think Wilson's my brother.
I was just naming the biggest known one of them. But the people who really, really believe in baptismal regeneration, according to what I've been reading, is Lutherans, and Martin Luther especially.
Depends on which Martin Luther and which Lutheran.
Right, yeah, and so speaking to somebody who has not only learned an immense amount of church history, but taught church history, in Martin Luther's refined, I guess you could say, in his last days, because that's what you would want. You want to look at the first copy of the Institutes of the Christian Religion for Calvin. You'd want to look at the last institute to get to know what his refined theology was. So towards the end of his days, would you say that he believes in baptismal regeneration, Luther? And a more important question: should baptismal regeneration, should we use that as a means to put people outside the pale of orthodoxy?
I do not claim to be a Luther scholar because there is so much to be read in Luther, and there's so much both development and contradiction in Luther that anyone who does apologetics and then also claims to be a Luther scholar, it's one or the other. I don't think how you could possibly do both. But I would struggle a little bit with the idea that what you want is Luther's final perspective, because, to be honest with you, the pre-1525 Luther, I think, resonates a whole lot more biblically than the post, and it doesn't have anything to do with theological maturity. If anything, it has to do with such a pressure in regards to the relationship between church and state. That
between him and what's his name, the Duke guy.
Well, not just that, and not just later Melanchthon's influence. That's a whole other issue. But given what happened with the Peasants' Revolt and what Luther said about it, and then southern Germany breaking away, and there just seems to be a real change in Luther's perspective on certain things because of what took place politically in his context. And so when you say, well, we want to go with the mature Luther, I'd rather go with the most biblical Luther, who is not as influenced by the political situation around him as any other Luther. So that's where I struggle a little bit with the idea of saying, well, at the end of his life, he wrote all those anti-Semitic things, which were just reflective of the general culture of his day, unfortunately.
True.
But still, is that what you really want to look at? And as far as I can tell, you can prove, when you talk about baptismal regeneration for Luther, now you're raising all the issues of infantile faith, the relationship between justification by faith and infantile faith and sacramentalism. And I've listened to a lot of folks, Chris Rosebaugh is a Lutheran, and so he does his thing. I don't believe that it's possible to put forward a consistent Martin Luther doctrine on that, because Luther was a theologian of the heart, not a theologian of the head. And the very thing that Calvin. I'm sorry?
Unlike Calvin.
I was going to say, the very thing that Calvin is attacked for is the fact that and I'm in the same boat here. And so if we're wrong, then, but I don't think God is glorified by inconsistency. I don't think God is glorified by my affirming contradictory statements about God. And so clearly Calvin had the emphasis in his thinking that I need to listen to all of what God has to say, and if there are things he says that my heart doesn't like, then my heart needs to change. I don't need to change what God has said. So Luther was a great theologian, but he was not nearly as consistent as Calvin was. And so I don't think you can put together I've talked to Lutherans who greatly de-emphasize the concept of baptismal regeneration in that sense. They have a high view of baptism, but they have a higher view of justification by faith. And then I've met Lutherans who are just straight down the road. I was baptized when I was an infant. That's all I need. Voila. And
which seems to me a lot like those easy believism. When you're 5 years old, you say a prayer and you're sealed forever. I mean, it seems very similar to that to me.
Again, it depends on the Lutheran you're talking to, there's just a lot of wiggle room there. I mean, one of the first people that assisted us back in the early days of the internet, and I had a lot of discussions about this very kind of thing. And I've talked to many a Lutheran that was so. It's interesting. The Lutherans that I've talked to that have had the most interaction with Rome, and hence have the most reaction against Rome, are the ones that emphasize the earlier Luther and his justification statements, and de-emphasize the idea of infant baptism actually resulting in regeneration. And then the Lutherans who are much more ecumenical in spirit in the sense of Roman Catholicism, just the opposite. So probably not a satisfactory answer for you, but I don't claim and see a bunch of people. Who was that guy? There was remember the guy in Limited Atonement last year sometime, about a year ago, more than a year ago. There was a Lutheran guy that wanted to debate on limited atonement and stuff. I'm sorry, I don't even remember the guy. I responded to something. He called in, remember? And we had that. People say, well, why you debate all these other people in this? Why won't you debate? Because to debate a Lutheran is to fall into an abyss of a massive amount of material, and it's just like Eastern Orthodoxy. I'm sorry, there's only so much I can do, and there's only so much time in the day, and I want to do what I do well, and I have no feeling whatsoever that the Lord is asking me to start spending those hours that I spend studying as it is, expanding that out to reading Luther and trying to figure out where each of these Lutheran groups are coming from and what their influences are and how much they read of Melanchthon and where they are in the development. I just know how complex the issues are. And a lot of the people that were clamoring, you're hiding from this guy, just don't know what the issues are. The same thing with Eastern Orthodoxy, same thing.
But just to be clear, but anybody who says regeneration and therefore justification occurs at the moment of baptism, whether that's at infant stage, or I guess you could say in the way the Church of Christ does it, you have to prove your worthiness of baptism and then do it. Any sort of baptismal regeneration is outside the pale of orthodoxy.
Outside the pale of biblical orthodoxy, I would say yes. If they are simply an ex operato sacramentalism, that fundamentally denies the freedom of God in election and the nature of saving faith, yes. Does that mean that a person who believes that a child could be regenerated, but they have to be of the elect and so on and so forth? It can get pretty sticky there, and obviously as a Baptist, I just go, it'd be a whole lot easier just to allow the New Testament to speak here.
Wait till they're older and baptize.
Just follow the New Testament paradigm. That might be good.
It would be simplify things a whole lot.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Yeah.